Ladies and gentlemen, children of all ages, this is another Wednesday. It's another episode of the Mattriarchy. I am, as usual, your host, Matt Reese. And I am joined today by some new faces. Some entirely different people. Well, one anyway. Hey, Metal, thanks for getting here. Appreciate it, man.
Hey, sorry, busy with these dogs that I'm watching.
Well, no, it's fine. I realize the way I said it sounded a little passive aggressive, but I did not mean it that way.
Did really somebody let the dogs out?
Woof, woof, woof.
Somebody, I don't know who. Anyway, we have the Metal as usual. Captain Cummings has joined us for today's topic. Michael Hutchison, Hutch, at You
Hello.
Lousy Kids, and for the first time ever on the show, been watching his videos for a number of years. Englantine, to talk about the old days, and that's kind of the part of the we're having here. Tonight's show, we are here to talk about the newsstand comics and how the industry moved away from the newsstand into the direct market, and was that a good idea or not? so that's tonight's big topic. So yeah, I'm excited. I've been wanting to have a conversation like this for a while, and I'm really glad for everybody who's been able to come. So first of all, I like to go around and kind of talk about how big of a part of your comics journey the newsstand was, because that's something that I think that comics have been only off the newsstand pretty much since 2012. Little wiggle room in there. I think I remember seeing Bongo comics still at our local grocery store as recent as like 14, but Marvel and DC were out of our stores entirely years before that. But that's right.
As far as I'm concerned, if there isn't a big spinning rack that draws the kids around, it's not really. I mean, there may be a comic on a shelf somewhere, but there really is no market if it's not. Yeah.
Well,
really.
Publix never had the spinner rack. Publix always had the magazine rack where they put the. By the way, Publix is just like the be all for grocery stores. It's huge down here in Florida, but the grocery stores always had a shelf rather than a spinning rack. I would love to be the guy who freaking deflates that spinner rack nostalgia balloon that everybody tends to, I want a spinner rack. No, you freaking don't. Let me tell you what the spinner rack does. It gives a groove right at each staple. Okay, I can't tell you how many times going into a spinner rack, no, that one's crap, that one's crap, that one's crap. Try to find a decently conditioned comic book off the spinner rack.
They literally fold over I own a spinner rack. The comics fold over the metal pieces.
There you go. So look, I love the nostalgia of the spinner rack. I love that. Hey Kids comics, that is awesome. Love it. But don't tell me that it was great during the spinner rack days if you cared any bit about condition, which I gotta tell you I did.
Yeah.
Well, after a while, you want to talk about the newsstand and how it affected you. My first experience with comics came from the library. My mom and dad was real intent on getting us to be readers, so they always took us to the library and said you could get whatever you want. And I got a hardcover collection. Couldn't tell you the title. I do not remember what that book looked like. I do remember seeing Plastic Man. I do remember seeing Hawkman and the Flash and loving that book to death. And then when I got to the convenience store, the Shop and Go, it was when I was a kid, and when I was a kid was 50 years ago, guys. So I when I finally got to pick up my own comics, it ended up being Richie Rich, Little Lotta, Baby Huey, and stuff like that. Give me the Harvey comics or Sad Sack, Beetle Bailey. Those were the ones I ended up picking up. Occasionally an X-Men or a Spider-Man or something like that. But that carried. The time that actually made me a collector, where I was like, okay, I got to put these up. I got to make sure they're good. I did go to the Shop and Go, and I had a whole bunch of bottles. I didn't realize that what I did, because I was carrying around a wagon trying to find a use to take a bottle to a convenience store, get 10 cents. Well, I found this big whole heap of bottles, and I put them in my wagon. I took them to the store. I went from the back of the store, took all of their bottles, and then sold them to them. I didn't even know I was doing that, but got a whole bunch of comics, and boom, that was it. So yeah, the spinner rack or the newsstand, huge effect on my collecting comics, because it was there I discovered the new Teen Titans and the Dial H for Hero.
Oh yeah,
good times though.
Yeah. How about you, Hutch? Did you? We've talked about it before, but I don't remember your story.
Well, I don't think I've actually told it. I don't want to get into great detail, but the 70s, I was born in 1970, and so I'm 53 now. And in the 70s, my parents they both ran a church camp, and they made I think it was $8,000 a year. They got housing and food, but in actual cash, $8,000. And so, I would beg for quarters to play video games. I didn't realize at the time, it's like, that one quarter, it'd be like, I didn't have much. I never had a single Star Wars action figure. And I look back on it now, I'm like, they were smart, because I wouldn't be satisfied with one action figure. He's got to fight somebody, and then I got to put him in something. And I know me, they were right not to do it, but man, it was hard. It was hard not having that. So I could occasionally get a one quarter to play a video game, and being the only video game I played for a week or two, I lasted a minute, and it's like, okay, well, I don't get to play again, so I never got any good at any of them. And so I never had the money for comics. But I was exposed to them, and I knew who Jughead was. I think mostly I got hand-me-down digests and some random comics. I saw my uncle's comics, and I saw his old Where Monsters Dwell and all those Marvel monster books and everything. We were just talking at the reunion this weekend. We don't know what happened to his pile of comics. He's dead a long time ago, and everybody thought I got them, and I'm like, no, we looked around his house, never saw him. So maybe he got rid of them. I don't know, but I read stuff. I mooched off other people and read stuff. I was lucky to have been exposed to Justice League 100, where it says in a little subtitle, Ralph Dibny is the only superhero to have a publicly known name. And I'm like, that's cool. And he became my favorite superhero. But that was only because I borrowed my friend's comic and read that. And I was like, and the first comic I ever bought in 1982 was at the drugstore where my mom worked for, $2 an hour or something like that. And it was the Justice League 200. And I was like, what a comic to start buying. That was the first one I ever bought. But yeah, that one was on a rack, not a spinner rack. I bought Crisis on Infinite Earths in 1985, and that was off the spinner rack. I bought a few comics because right around the mid 80s, that's when we actually had enough money that I could spend $1 on something.
You never saved up the lunch money?
I never. No, I actually had free lunches because we were so poor.
Okay.
And my mom was a teacher at the school.
That's actually how I was able to afford my comics back in the day. I wouldn't eat lunch at the school. And then I would take it to the store, to the bookstore or whatever.
Well, by the mid 80s, we had enough money for me to start getting into comics, but certainly not to the extent that I later was. But I actually subscribed. Shortly after I began to love comics, I got them delivered by subscription. And a comic shop did open in La Crosse near us, but that was right around the time that Secret Wars came out. And Secret Wars advertised on TV, and at the end it said, pick it up at whatever it was in the in La Crosse. I can't remember anymore the name of the shop, but I was like, there's a comic shop in La Crosse, and I went and found it. And it was in a basement. You had to go downstairs. It was in the basement of a business building, and I found it, and it was like, wow, a whole new world, But I didn't have a bike. I would occasionally drive in, be driven in by my parents and say, could you drop me off at the comic shop? And this is the thing. Yeah, comic shops exist, but can you get to them versus your mom takes you to the grocery store and you're like, I'll be over at the comics until you're done, and that's that leads kids into comics, whereas wanting to actually go to the comic shop then this is getting into the meat of it, but it was all around the same time, right around the time I started buying comics from my local store. It was right around the time I found out, my grocery store was right around the time I found out that a comic shop existed. But when I did get to go there, I didn't have the money to buy much. They had the first appearance of the Justice League fighting Starro on the shelf, and I was like, oh man, if I had $200, I would have grabbed that.
Yeah, wouldn't you love to go back to that time and buy the first appearance of Batman for only $500?
One of the best presents I ever got, which I want to say was probably around 1985 or 1986, whenever I found out it existed. I don't know when Secret War wasn't Secret Wars 84 or 85, somewhere around there. But I wasn't a Marvel reader, but I know that's when they advertised it. And anyway, my parents got me the first appearance of Elongated Man, like a $5 copy. But it's like
it was all that way.
They spent $5 on a comic book. I couldn't believe it. That was I wanted it.
I remember having a love for the Silver Age before it got big, and I picked up a whole bunch of keys. I didn't even know they were keys. It's like Avengers #4. Okay, well that's a $6 book. Let me pick that up, and it was just like I picked up all this stuff, and we were living in Texas at the time, and Florida's really our home. So the family said, okay, we're going to go to Florida. And when we got back home, I was like, where's my comics? Oh, we put it in storage. We're going to go back and get it. I'm still freaking waiting. Yeah, somebody got themselves a sweet freaking storage unit when they opened that one up.
Oh,
what month are you born in there?
March.
Kid? March? Okay. I'm not the oldest. The birthday's coming up in July, or at the end of July here. So, yeah. And I officially turned 53.
So, Captain, what about you? Did you just to change the subject, next person? Did you start reading comics off the newsstand, or how did you get introduced to this amazing hobby?
I don't know if I ever bought any comics off the newsstand. I did buy in 2020 when we went to Japan some manga off the newsstand when we were in Tokyo, but that's not the same thing. We had a comic book store like right down the street from our house, and so I was big into playing Magic the Gathering, and they had tables in the back, and we would play there. And I would never buy them because I would just go up and flip through them on the wall, and I would never buy anything. I remember back in the day, my favorites were, of course, Wolverine, the X-Men, and Witchblade, because it was like a nude woman with like metal stuff on her body. Oh, and Spawn. That's about it. That's all I got.
Yeah. Well, I was for myself, I started reading at the grocery store, right? I mean, I grew up with comics in the newspaper. I am not the oldest person, but which is not normal for the show. Normally I am. But I am old enough that there was still Superman in our Sunday funnies when I was a kid.
I miss the comic strips.
Oh yeah. Right. Yeah. But I was that's how I got into reading comics as a thing. But I wouldn't call myself a comic fan until I saw the DuckTales and Uncle Scrooge Adventures reprints that were being produced in the early 90s, along with the cartoon.
The Gladstone books?
Yeah, the Gladstone books.
Okay.
Exactly.
Those are pretty damn good.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Yeah.
I had been a fan of the cartoon, and we moved into here in Nebraska, and you couldn't find the cartoon on any of our stations, right? It just wasn't syndicated out here. And so I had this DuckTales, the Scrooge McDuck itch, and I found it at the grocery store, and I'm starting reading through all these, and I'm kind of getting into it, and then I see that the Uncle Scrooge Adventure is right next to Batman, and I was like, well, what's this all about? And the Green Hornet, now's Green Hornet, was being published at the time, and I was like, whoa. So all we had in my little town were gas stations, and we had gas stations and grocery stores and whatever. And that was, it wasn't for probably a year until we took a trip up to Rapid City, and I went to the first comic shop I ever walked into, and I was just like, it was like walking into Alibaba's a cavern of riches. But it was a totally different experience. As a 12-year-old, I think I was at that point, it was also a little shocking, the number of bikini-clad superheroes on the shelves of the stores, and my mother grabbing my shoulders awkwardly about all of that. So that was weird. But yeah, so I definitely have a fondness for being able to go down to the gas station and, pick up my books and ride my bicycle home and all that kind of stuff. And it was just one of those things where I because there wasn't a shop in our town, I never would have been able to get into comics if they hadn't been there on the shelf. And that's my experience anyway. Twitless has joined us. Appreciate you coming on, man. You, if I remember, you are young enough where your experience really was not a newsstand experience at all.
Well, and this is something that I'm totally fine with being wrong about, but isn't Newsstand also somewhat, maybe not entirely, but isn't it somewhat geographic as well? Because like once you get far enough out in the country, you get newspapers, but it's not like get your newspapers, the distribution gets a little different. So like the whole like newsstand thing, I think is very, very normal for metropolitan areas. Mm-hmm. But for some of us, like, it's going to the delicatessen or whatever, and the spinner rack is like really important. So I do at least remember spinner racks in some places. I mean, maybe not at the delicatessen. I'm not that old, but I do remember a spinner rack in my local, I think what was it? Books A Million.
Yeah.
Before they shut that down. I have a very interesting history with comics because my earliest memories were my parents had a box of old ones, but I still remember some of the covers. Like there was this cover of Superman being assaulted by all these miniature Supermen. And I was so young, I had no idea how to process this. I was just like, why are there 100 million Supermen? And Hutch probably knows the exact issue I'm talking about. Toy Man with his, the myriad of toy Supermen. And so I remember that cover. I also remember a cover, one of the really expensive silver covers that they put on, it was Avengers, I think.
I think so.
Back with, and I remember Black Knight with a jacket and like an energy sword. I was just looking at the pictures. So I had that box of comics. I would just look at them and not really even know what I was looking at. And then, my mom, like many parents did, at some point threw them all out, and then comics became persona non grata for many years. And so, in order for me to get a hold of them, I had to sneak off to the library. And so, my experience of comics was very much like, what could I pick up very quickly and skim read very quickly while I was briefly at the library, and then like slink off home in shame. And so I ended up reading a whole bunch of like Superman in the 60s at some point, just because they had a collection of that. So I got like a dose of Silver Age Superman because it was on the shelf at the library. All right. Long story short, when I first started buying comics, it was actually way later. And I was in my college years. And I went to a local comic book shop because I saw the solicitations for Avengers versus X-Men. And it's not the greatest story, but it had probably one of the best pitches for a story in terms of your favorite characters duking it out. Have you ever really want to see Iron Man duking it out with Magneto, right? And I'm like, hell yeah. So in terms of like collecting a series, I was like, I really just got to see Red Hulk versus Colossus. So it was the most kind of primitive level of just, I got to see these guys bashing it out. And that's kind of what got me into stores, like buying them as opposed to just kind of like after looking at them after the fact, sometimes decades after.
Yeah, that's oh my goodness. Hang on. Somebody's calling me. I got it. Okay.
Okay. Is there anyone else on the panel who has not yet spoken, or did everyone else go?
Oh, me. I haven't.
Okay, all right, Metal.
Okay.
All right.
So, I'm probably the youngest person on the panel, as usual. But I'm not too far from Twitless, so our experiences are probably fairly similar. By the time that I got into comics, I didn't even know that a comic book was a thing for a while. Like, I read newspaper comics, right? Everybody read newspaper comics, but there was nowhere around me that sold comic books. There was not a comic store in my town for me to know that there was comic books. The closest thing to a comic book that I knew existed for a while was like magazines like Highlights or Boys' Lives that would have comics in them, but that wasn't the whole thing. So in my head, it's like there was no such thing as a comic book. But I was like super obsessed with mythology, so I was going to the library a lot and I was reading all like the books on mythology in my library, and eventually I ran out of books to read. And I was talking to the librarian, and the librarian was like, well, what do you like from these books? I was like, well, I like these larger-than-life stories, and I like the heroes and stuff in them. And the librarian took me back to the kids section, which as a little kid I never went to because I thought kids' books were stupid, and showed me, very similar to what you were talking about, Englantine, is these collections, hardcover. And I actually remember the first one I read was Tales to Astonish, and it had like Giant Man and Hulk on the front cover. It was just a whole hardcover collection. And to me, it was like no different than reading the stories about all these myths that I had been reading up to that point. And that is what really started getting me into comics. And it took me a while to find any place that actually sold comics, because I was like at the edge of Dallas County. So I had to go like a whole town over to get to the nearest comic book store. And as a small kid, that was a walk I wasn't prepared to take yet. That didn't happen until years later. But then when like a Barnes and Noble came into town, I was able to start like sitting around in there and reading for free in the corner where nobody would kick you out. A few of the hardcovers, but I didn't have too many comics. It was mostly manga. So I really got into manga because Barnes and Noble always had like a ton of manga available. And then, as the internet became an easier and easier way to read comics, then I started going through the backlogs. That's basically my experience. I don't think I even saw a physical spinner rack until I took a trip to downtown Dallas, and there was this old soda parlor there that was supposed to try to mimic what old soda parlors were like, and you could go and you get like a root beer float at the counter, and they had a bunch of stuff on display, and they had a spinner rack there with a bunch of old comics that you couldn't buy, but you could look at them if you were promised not to break them or anything like that, tear the pages or stain them.
You're describing the Woolworths counter to a couple of old people right here.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've heard about this kind of thing, but I lived in Tallahassee for a second, experienced just a little bit, but I kind of lived in an abundance of comic shops. Me and my brothers, we first went to this place called Duga's Bookstore. This is back in like 1982. Yeah, I remember the name. The first comic shop I ever went to was called Enterprise 1701. It was exactly what the Simpsons are mimicking with the comic book guy. I want you to buy it, but just don't touch it. That kind of thing. It was, I thought it would be a fun place to go. My brother was forced to drag me with his friends, and people were talking about I watched Star Trek. Let me talk about Star Trek. But when I did, the guys just looked at, because I was like, 12, around that time, looked at me like I was a freaking freak. But after that, we just had shop after shop open. So by the time I was 15, 16, out making my own money and everything, actually around 13, I started making my own money, going to different stores. Can I clean up for you? Can I get you lunch? Doing that kind of thing, whatever you could to hustle to grab a dollar here or there. And it was very much, if I could go to the convenience store, or there was just a bookstore right around the corner that was selling comics. A lot of the smaller bookstores realized, and this is true, back in the day, that comic books were kind of on the ascent. They were all of a sudden something you did want to sell. I mean, it got ridiculous as the baseball card collectors ruined their market and decided to jump over into ours. but I have never experienced, except for one time when I lived in Tallahassee, this comic book desert I hear people describe. It was always a little bit easier to find. I'm reading Hiroshi Paradox.
Hiroshi Paradox.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
But he's telling a story about how, or was it Jim Turner? One of them, Jim Turner, I think. He's telling a story about how you can't find books, and then if you go to a con, there was all these comics, just aplenty. That's, by the way, I'll give you advice. I've been going to this this comic book warehouse run by a shop down here called Coliseum of Comics. Know the owner, used to work for him, good guys. But I've been noticing a lot of new books hitting this thing because it's all overstock and stuff like that. A ton of new books. Nobody likes the new books anymore. So you don't have to pay full price. You're muted there, you lousy kids.
When I was in Dallas, I went to a comic book store. No, it wasn't Dallas. No, there was a Dallas store that didn't sell new books. And then I drove to Arkansas last weekend, and in Springfield, there was a store that didn't have new books. They only sold old books.
Yep. That's the way people are going now. I see it so many times in my comment section. I've given up on new books. I've given up on new books. I still have a freaking pile of them I need to buy at the comic shop, but
so
can't do it anymore.
If I can, so I think this kind of bounces off what England's point, but it is interesting. There is does anyone have Ollie's where you're at?
Mm-hmm.
So Ollie's gets all of that overstock, and they mark it down by like up to like 70 to 80%.
Is that a grocery store?
No, it's a
bargain. It's a bargain basement store is what we used to call them.
Okay.
Where like if they just buy overstock and things that didn't sell, and they put it out for a discounted price. And Ollie's has been getting, as he's been saying, trade paperbacks left and right. Go on ahead, Twit.
Yeah, you can get. So it's weird because it's just up to like what they have, but I swear I think it was like over $1,000 worth of comics for like $300. And we're talking like trade paperbacks, for like $3, new ones. And
this right here, I paid $10 for.
Wow.
Yeah. It's an annotation book. It's got the stories, and then it's got all the little notes. This is the Brief Lies chapters of Sandman. They just, that Alex Ross Wonder Woman, that a while back he put out these
the oversized ones. Yeah,
the treasury sized. They had the Wonder Woman there for $3.99. I've got that. You could pick up these big old I'm looking over here, these big old DC and Marvel through the years kind of books. Those were, I think, $10 or $12.
It's random, but like I'll sometimes buy a whole bunch of new comics because I can get them for $3 and I get the trade paperbacks of it. So
got the $30.
Wow.
Yeah. So
but that kind of says something about the state of our failing industry. That all these really great volumes are available for pennies on the dollar almost.
Well, you do notice the company that they're from.
Yeah.
I will say that I do see both Marvel and DC at Ollie's. I have, and this could be just my random sampling, I do notice more DC comics at Ollie's for cheaper on average. That's just been my experience. But it's great. You can get tons of stuff. It's just completely random what you'll get.
Yeah. If I could I was thinking about, back in the 80s, we were talking about, the transition from the transition to comic shops, which were on the rise in the 80s. And I remember going to B. Dalton Bookseller at the Valley View Mall. And that was before I found out about the comic shop. But I was kind of, this is the problem with the spin racks. It's not just the state of them on the spin racks, because quite frankly, I'd be there on Wednesday and they weren't too degraded. I'd be there when the comics came out. But the reason that comics were single story, one and done, was because they'd be the single one and done stories were because you couldn't guarantee that you would get next month's issue. You couldn't tell a 4-part story because it'd be like, I was there and they're all gone, and where are you going to find this if you
or they weren't ordered or something?
Right.
It was very random what would show up on a newsstand. You're right about that.
Yeah. So the comic shops made that possible, whereas you couldn't count on going across the street to the gas station.
That being said, I think one of the things that has hurt the industry today is the lack of one and dones.
Right.
So it's not so much because I always hear this. How do I start collecting comics? My answer: you buy one, you read it. If you like it, buy the next one. And if there's a hero in there that you see that you like or a character, go buy their book. And that's how you do it. But it's kind of it's kind of mocking what people go through. You could buy one comic of say Kamala Khan, which we all have because she's such a great character. And you could be right in the middle of a story.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, so what's going on? This is, by the way, I call this is the curse that Grant Morrison had wrought upon our hobby is the word I'm trying to find. Sorry. Look, JLA, awesome. Love it. Love the fact. And he always wrote in 4 to 6 issue storylines. So they collected the series, and then here comes Bendis. Hey, I could do that. I can rip off anybody. And he did the same thing for Ultimate Spider-Man and Daredevil, wrote in 6 issue. And all of a sudden, everybody's writing for the trades. They're not writing for the reader. They're not writing for the newsstand.
Or you had Jonathan Hickman that would write like 24 issue story arcs. It's like, what is that?
Well, I mean, even that is even the case. Grant Morrison was doing that with Doom Patrol too, but that's also the case with Sandman, where it's written as a 9-year story. Starman is one of my favorite books, and it is. Yep. It's 88 issues. It's one story. It's 88 issues long. I appreciate that. There were lots of smaller stories that he did throughout those in either of those cases too. But it definitely is a variation on a difference from that.
The difference. I'll go on ahead to it.
If I may, I think part of the I think we'd be all in agreement. I think it's not one thing. It's necessarily there's this constellation of encroaching problems that collectively drag down the industry and the hobby and leave it in the state it's in today. And so I think that, that some of that transition that Ingleton is mentioning towards these longer story arcs, writing to the trade, that's definitely, I think, one of those constellations. I think that getting out of, I think there's some price point. I don't know where the threshold is. This would be something that I think the panel would be really great at answering. The threshold where comics were, because it used to be candy, ice cream, soda, comic book. You could all buy them for a very similar kind of price point, and kids could eventually just go and just get a bunch of them themselves. Back when the comic pandemic, when people were having the panic, it was because the kids could basically scrounge some nickels and then go pollute their minds. But according to the naysayers, right? So then, that's a constellation where when we cross that threshold and it starts getting priced higher. I think, of course, we can't underplay the role that television and then video games played. And so all of those things took their share, they took their toll, and then we're left at some point, we cross this another threshold, this point of no return, where it's the only people going and getting comics was this kind of self parasitical group of people who just went to one location.
Right.
So
I want to back up a little bit on this too, because of my technical difficulty. I meant to bring this up just before my computer froze on me.
We covered for you.
I know. I caught part of it, and I tried coming back in on my phone, and it was a whole ordeal.
Once per stream. So once per stream this happens. So we should be good for the rest of the night.
Hopefully we'll be fine. Okay. I even did an update today, hoping to avoid this. Anyway, moving along. Jim Tuner brings up a great point about the comics appearing randomly, having to go to cons to pick up issues that never made it to the store. And one of the things that I wanted to tie this into is we're talking about the remnants of that, and also the idea that newsstands weren't necessarily a thing in some more rural communities. And I wanted to share, I don't know if you guys know this in any place where you're from, but out here in the sticks of Nebraska, when our news distribution agency dealt in comics, they didn't buy issues like subscriptions. They bought them by the ton. They would order a certain weight of comics, and it would just be whatever the distribution company that they purchased from, they'd sell them. And so you never knew what you were going to get from place to place. And that was part of why, is because they didn't, I mean, it was, they ordered them by weight. And so it was just one of those things that happened at the end of the distribution chains on all that kind of thing. But it was still a factor where you know, they were accessible, even if you didn't always, because back when I was first reading, got into Batman in 91, I think this one, they had when they introduced Anton Furst's version of Gotham City into the continuity I can't remember the name of the storyline even.
Is that the one where it was like, it looked like a real city with a cartoon Batman swinging across the cover?
Yeah. Exactly. And it was like, there was a 3-issue miniseries, and like 1 and 3 were in Batman, and issue 2, I guess it was 4. 2 and 4 were in Detective Comics.
Yeah, I remember the storyline.
Yeah. And I really enjoyed it. There was a mad bomber, and there was all sorts of crazy stuff, and Bruce Wayne's, you know, crazy great grandfather commissioned all these weird buildings to be built. And anyway, point being, I was really hooked into that storyline, and I could only get like 2/3 of it in my town. So next time I went to Cheyenne, I was digging through spinner racks to try to find it there. But because it didn't show up there. But that was part of why is the distribution model was part of the magazine distribution, and so it had a whole different kind of chain. And I can definitely see the appeal of the direct market, because they were ordering direct, they were getting books rather than from these news agencies, this branching tree of news agencies. You could get it directly from somebody who got it off the presses that DC was hiring out. And so I definitely see it. I love the idea of comic shops when I could get into the big city and go visit them for sure. But one of the questions that I have, and what I really want people's opinion on here, is comic shops gave a dependability, and a relationship between the points of distribution and the comic companies, right? They could know that it was getting to somebody who was buying it. Whereas with the news distribution, news agencies and magazine distributions, everything was out there on spec. You never knew it was going to get. There was turnability was built in, and it's a lot. I can definitely see DC and Marvel saying, well, we know we're going to make money if we sell them to the comic stores, and we're only maybe going to make money if we sell them to the news distribution agencies. But it seems that also that bottlenecks the potential new customer base. That's one of the things I wonder about.
Do you mind?
Go.
There was a couple of things to that. One of the reasons why comic shops became so attractive to Marvel and DC is they got rid of returnability. When it came down to the newsstand, what ended up happening was, and this is why sometimes you'll see old comics with the top of the cover torn off, because what would end up happening was if the newsstand wanted to get a refund, they would tear the top of the cover off. They would send those in, and they would get refunded for them. The reason that they had to tear the cover off was because then they couldn't sell them again on the back issue market. With the direct market, they ended that, and that's why now, of course, you have the back issue bins along with the new books and such. I think that's a little bit underhanded. I wonder what it would do to the back issue market if they did stop. I think they did for a little bit. It's just that being able to return them means that DC and Marvel have an obligation to actually make good books that people would want to read. I've mentioned so many times, though, we are not the customer of DC and Marvel. the comic shops are. So all they've got to do is convince the comic shops that we're interested in a book. But that's where that came from. And I absolutely agree. Any market outside of the we're living proof. Any market outside of the direct market will be good for bringing people in. If you expose the comics to different people are going to want to come in. You would think the movies would be enough, but that has not yet proven to be.
Yeah. Well, if you like the movies, there's nothing on the shelves that reflects the movies. I mean, there's no published tie-in like there used to be, where they have a tie-in issue that is the adaptation of the movie. I think if you go get the book out there, the characters are different.
Hey, Captain, you remember being called a racist for saying exactly what he just said?
Me?
I just swore back in the day.
Oh, but
I think. When was the last time? Because I know Mike Carlin tried to synchronize or at least plan some of the comic book storylines around the release of the Lois and Clark television show. But at some point, those departments stopped talking to each other at some level. As Hutch is mentioning, when Iron Man hit, and Iron Man was a character, as Jim Shooter used to say, no one knew who Iron Man was, and that's no longer the case. And people actually went into the store there. I think there were some comic book store owners who said people walked in and they said, my kid loved the Iron Man movie. Show me the Iron Man books. And it was like at that exact moment, they had killed Iron Man and they had Riri Williams out. And they were like, here's what we got. And the parents went, thanks, and never came back.
At the height of the Marvel Universe, and this is what I was talking about with the captain here. One thing I'm very proud of is the Four Horsemen, what became known as the Four Horsemen. Captain Cummings, I believe, was the beginning of this. Me, Doug Ernst, and, of course, that other guy that blew the fuck up. Excuse the language. Your boy, Zach. And we used to talk about that back in the day, how there is no correlation. You had female Thor, you had Riri Williams, you had Sam Wilson as Captain America. This is the height of the Marvel Universe as far as the movies are concerned. None of them looked like what their movie counterpart, which would have dragged people in. And just mentioning that, look, give Riri Williams her own book. Let Sam Wilson be the Falcon. Lady Jane, call her that, bring in Thor. And we were chastised. We were called all sorts of ists and for pointing that out.
Didn't the last Thor movie kind of flop when they finally did Lady Thor, basically?
I don't know if I think it was one of those things where, it's horrible. I don't know if it flopped like financially.
Yeah, I believe it made money, but it
probably made money, but
it's the worst, Captain. It's the worst.
I think all of those were financial, we call it, was it underperformers? They weren't happy. I think I
don't think they started losing money.
Ant-Man was Jones flop, but it actually
Ant-Man was the first official flop of the Marvel Universe, meaning it lost money. And I think that was the case on that. This is just the year for it. But
how do you flop with Paul Rudd's Ant-Man?
You make it too expensive,
and you make it not about.
I like the Ant-Man movies. I didn't see the newest one though.
I love the first two. Yeah, I'm in.
To England's point, though, because of the point being the synchronization or lack of synchronization between comics and film, by the time they came out with Lady Thor in the films, I believe she had basically really stopped being
in the comics.
So much. So the synchronization is still off no matter how you look at it. And so, they need a little more.
They at least publish a hardcover at the same time? You know what I mean?
I don't think they even did. At least not that I saw.
No, they didn't.
Yeah.
I mean, it was when they had the Venom.
When the Fantastic Four movie with the Silver Surfer came out, why didn't they grab the old book, the original story of that, and put out a brand new edition branded with the movie tie-in, and that's the time to release that at least.
Or release Ultimate Extinction, which is where the lines were directly ripped from.
Okay.
like line for line from the Rise of the Silver Surfer movie rips straight from Ultimate Extinction, I think. It's or Ultimate,
that was the Ultimate Comics had Galactus as a cloud. This is not just a movie thing. Yeah. It wasn't literally. I don't think in the comics it was literally a cloud, but it wasn't a big guy with a freaking hat. It's like,
well, the line about I stayed and studied my books like a good little nerd or whatever, like that's straight from the comic. So there was stuff from the films that you could literally be like, hey, you like that line from the movie? Here it is in the comic. The synchronization was really poor. They need some more Mike Carlin energy.
I think that's a general problem with the movies. I don't think the movies are a good advertisement for the comics most of the time, because most of the time the movies are nothing like the comics, right? Like I'll go and I will watch a movie, and maybe if I'll go check it out, even if there was something that correlated directly with the comic and the movie that we're looking at, even if it has a lines, it's like the characters aren't acting the way that you expect them to be acting from panel to panel. Or vice versa. So I got sold one character, and I got somebody who looked exactly like him, but wasn't the same character. And you get it in both directions depending on which one that you got first. It's always made me not.
That's especially a great example of that is Guardians of the Galaxy.
You'd still be able to market it better to those people who walked in the store and said, "Hey, I watched that movie, I liked it." You'd still be able to have, and like I said, they as Angleton and Hutch said, they didn't even have that.
And I want to reflect back on my childhood on this a little bit, right? So I was getting into Batman just as Batman '89 was. I mean, like it had been in the theaters. I hadn't started buying comics yet, but that got it back in my head, right? And so I was buying DuckTales, and then I saw Batman on the shelf, and there's all this press everywhere, and I'm remembering the Adam West show from when I was like 6, and so I'm like, I wonder what this is about. And so, like, the first Batman book I picked up was the World's Finest. There's the 3rd issue of the World's Finest prestige format book that the guy who was the artist for Watchmen. Why does the name escape?
Gibbons?
It's Gibbons.
Gibbons wrote a World's Finest 3-part. I got issue 3 at a grocery store on my way out of Scottsbluff. We were driving to Douglas. We were picking up some snacks for the road. I snagged this book. I read the ink off the cover of that book.
I got the trade. It really is a good book.
Oh, it's so good. Yeah. I went back and got this 1 and 2 when I was like, 19.
And those painted covers on it were really
so just good.
Perfection.
Yeah, that this was nothing like anything I knew, except I kind of knew the characters, and like I didn't know Barbara Gordon had been injured or any of this stuff. Is all the stuff in the book. So like I'm like immersed in this thing.
Well, I would venture to say that you lousy kids and myself were even more immersed in the whole Adam West of the Batman thing. I have a similar story because when I went to the shop and got a whole bunch of the Batman comics, they were having a sale, 10 cents, bought a shit ton of comics. The storyline that was going on in Detective, and at that time it went Detective Batman, kind of like Superman would in the 90s, where they went from one to the other, telling a 2-part story in each. And this one was about a guy in a skeleton mask that was jumping out at cops and just killing cops left and right. And it was like really dark and gruesome. And so every day, 4:30 after school, I'd be putting on Next Time on Batman. And then same bat time, right? And then I open the pages and it's like, cop die / / it is a bit of
tonal dissonance.
But the thing is I got to admit, it was the kind of thing I didn't know I was supposed to be reading. So there was an edge to it, and I thought it was really cool. So even though it wasn't exactly the same thing, this was something new. I don't know. And I've always I've always accepted stuff like that. Okay, so this is that version. This is this version. And now I'm getting 2 great worlds out of it. So,
yeah. But, if a kid nowadays saw a Batman, well, actually, I wouldn't even show the Batman to a kid. It's got tons of stuff. I mean, it's borderline inappropriate. I still don't think, I'm sorry, I may be an old fuddy-duddy, but I still don't think that if you got a movie that's going to draw kids in, you shouldn't have the F word in the movie. Especially if it's Superman or Batman, you make underoos of those characters, you should not be putting F words in the movie.
So
I'm sorry.
The movie should be based. I love this. I love that the tone of the film should match the marketing. So like the whole Batman Returns thing, which got us Joel Schumacher.
The tone of the movie should match the underwear.
Yeah, there you go. Who are we marketing the underwear to? That's where
I'm just saying there's still a lot of draw, but that actually is the problem. Is there's still a lot of draw for kids who like these characters, and I'm sorry, those characters have grown up. Make a rated R Batman, please. It's like, it's still a character who appeals to kids,
and I think you can have the superhero storytelling that appeals to those that have our sensibilities, but doesn't have to be, Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman.
But my point was, though, if you did somehow have a movie that appealed to a kid, and he's like, "Mommy, I want to go get some Batman comic books," you take him in, and there's Dark Knight's Metal. Is that what you're going to hand over to the little kids? Yeah. Here you go. Start with this.
What you're talking about, and something Twitless mentioned, as far as it's not just, of course, what's going on the page, what's going on in the world has kind of changed everything as well. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have the amount of video games. Ours were like, okay, now I'm running. That it was just this.
You could only play an NES game for like an hour.
Right. So we didn't have all the other things. What we had at certain levels is shared experience. There is no Batman the Animated Series for you that you 90s kids had to drag you in. There's no, there might be a Batman Animated Series out there, but it's on one of many streaming services that you might not be watching. There's a reason why the biggest TV show of all time will always be the end of MASH. The last MASH episode, because at that time we only had 3 channels and 2 UHFs, so everybody was having that shared experience, and I think that's part of what's missing as far as gathering everybody together.
I like that. Can I bounce off that for a second? In addition to the shared experience, one thing that I noticed, and this is something that Reese and Metal and a couple others and I have actually rekindled just a teeny bit of, is and it's something that the direct market and the internet market have also squelched, which is the idea that you would have shared experiences reading comics with fellow comics readers. And that half of the fun of it, actually, the half of the fun of buying a floppy was buying a floppy, and then your friends bought some other floppies, and then you said, "Oh, sometimes you traded them," but even if you read the same one, you would basically you'd be talking about it, and then you'd be saying, "Oh, I wonder what's going to happen next month," and so like it was part of comics is a social experience. And if comics becomes you just going to the store and quietly buying some issues you have on pull, and then leaving and going home and then locking them away in those plastic poly bags, you have destroyed a part of the experience. And it's something that's very interesting, because when I click on channels that are comic book channels, I occasionally I'll just Google the word comics and then click live and see who's on. And oftentimes it's Engeltine. Just saying. But aside from that, it's funny to see like who else actually just talks about comics. And a lot of people are just, it's this very collector's based kind of thing where it's just,
how much is this going to be worth?
Right. What I buy today and what condition was it? And it's like, there's just this lack of, hey, did you buy this issue? Let's all talk and have fun with that. And that's completely like non-existent. And when Reese and I started, and a couple others, Metal included, when we started just reading Dawn of DC Superman and just talking about it, like it just started to re-energize. Oh, this is why this is fun.
You picked such a good one too, because it is the opposite of the problem I had growing up, right? Because like I would watch all the cartoons, I'd watch like X-Men and I'd watch Batman, and when I jumped to their comics that were running around that time, when I finally got to them, they didn't feel like this thing I saw on TV. But Superman, when even written half decent, is probably like the most consistent character out of any. It's really hard to mess him up. You have to go out of your way to mess up Superman, which
they
people
seem
obviously
to.
have been doing.
Yeah,
like
they
the
managed
last
to do it.
decade. Yeah, you have to really go out of your way, but they managed to.
Yeah.
But this, it feels like the same character I watched on TV. It feels like the same character that I watched in the movie when that would come on. Same character, the comics I'd read in the late '90s. It's like it's Superman. We're actually reading Superman. You would have no problem marking this to somebody who had seen almost any other version of Superman.
A lot of times, as far as Superman's concerned, the writers don't get it. I think Tomasi was the last one that did. The Superman has one superpower. They say he's overpowered, but no. In all honesty, when you're looking right at him, Superman has one superpower, and that is the ability to do the right thing always. His super strength, his heat vision, whatever actual superpower he has is in service to that. If you don't see Superman as somebody who will always do the right thing, then you're not getting the character. I think that's also something we lose with all of the evil Superman we're getting. They just don't get it. This is
dozen of those.
They love to make everything evil.
Yeah.
And they love to write snark, a lot of these guys. So
everybody wants to be Josh Whedon.
None of that. That's all the opposite of Superman.
If I can make a brief advertisement, Joshua Williamson, who's currently writing the Dawn of DC Superman run, is someone I think who is very close to getting it. I think he gets it a lot more than he doesn't, and that's kind of why I've been enjoying it, which is nice because he's writing it straight down middle of the road Superman, and it's almost like either he or editorial were like, we've lost a lot of people, we need to try and recapture some of that.
Well, another point too is like Superman is like peak Americana, so like if you don't understand like just Midwest mentalities, like you're probably not going to write a very good Superman comic.
It's kind of hard to think about, though. If a Superman is starting his career now and he's 25, that means he grew up with the internet. He had a cell phone. You know, it's when I was growing up, it's like I remember when it was like you could kind of understand why he felt like an outsider to the townies who lived in town in Smallville. And it's like that writer gets the difference when you live on the farm and you have to go into town, and the people who live in the town, and how you have to go 2 towns over because that's the nearest theater, and things like that. Like what you were talking about, we don't have one in this town, but 1 town over is, this market or that store. And that's what it's like to be in small town. But then that's the way it was for me pre-internet. Nowadays, people just order stuff if they need it. You don't go looking for a store, 4 towns over.
That's so boring. It's really boring to do it. I get collections that way for the auctions and everything. I'm shilling, but when it comes to finding that grail, it's so much more fun to be in the shop and going, oh my gosh, there it is. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's one thing that is, it's so mixed, like even totally off subject, but even the show, right? I've been doing it for years. We've had great conversations about stuff. I have seen like 2 of my guests in person. Well, three, ooh.
Yeah, I found this in the shop the last time. This is the 4th appearance of Flash. Just sold it for $175. Woo! Paid $60 for it. So yay!
Nice.
All right.
Yeah. But
Okay,
we have these. The internet gives us this chance to build these relationships with each other and talk about things that we matter about and all that other kind of stuff. But like it's disembodied, right? And even the idea about going down to the 7-Eleven or the quick stop and flipping through the things on the magazine rack, what we're talking about is these embodied experiences, right? Mm-hmm. And even going to the comic shop and smelling the moldering paper and all that kind of stuff, that's still a thing. But it's one of my fears is that enough, and I think it's being borne out, is not enough people are seeking out comic shops because they don't have a good point of entry. And movies could have been it, but they're not. You know, they're the newsstand, which, you know, we're never going to get back to that. And that's just, you know, people talk about wanting to get comics into Walmart or whatever, and they're never going to be like they were. That system doesn't exist anymore, and it can't be brought back. There just isn't the distribution. The distribution system just doesn't exist anymore.
I'm sorry.
Trying to put the. I'm sorry. It's trying to, like, you know, they have to put a new roof on.
I'm like this. I was told.
Yeah, it's fine. They're having to put a new roof on Notre Dame, and no one knows how to do it. So they're going to have to invent something brand new because the knowledge has been lost. This is like that, only somewhat less tragic because it's not Notre Dame.
Do you want to hear how I read comics?
Go ahead.
So I read them on my phone at the gym in between sets. But they're not American comics. It's Show and Jump because it's only like $3 a month and you can read anything you want.
Oh, I love that app.
Like thousands of issues if you can. And it's like, honestly, like, why would I read Marvel if they can't even like get close to that price point?
Oh, you lousy kids.
I used to start my videos off with Clint Eastwood. Get off my lawn. Anytime I was about, that's it. That's the clip every freaking time. Anytime I was about to rant, get off my lawn.
All right, so
that's how I end my videos.
I'm not a fuddy duddy, and I actually I have enjoyed recently going to my comic book shop, and I have one that's pretty close by, and picking out. Like, I even, like, for the first time ever, I was like, ooh, I'm gonna get this variant cover because it reminds me, like, I'd never really paid attention to that sort of thing. And again, chunk of it, and if everyone has their opinion on how to save comics, but one thing I think that might help answer Reese's question, which is point of entry, is encouraging, even using the internet, encouraging readers groups, which is not just me making a video about it, but like, hey, let's all talk about what you liked about this week in the Superman comic, because right. And because that's what the kids did back in the day when they were exchanging the issues. That's when the direct market, I think, was actually working. I think it was when people came to the store and then had their little, you know, powwows of talking about whether they're just leaning on the counter and talking about what was happening. I think the fragmentation of it into I'm just reading this by myself alone because I still like it. That's, I think, where it dies. Because, you know, we've actually, even in a small, very, very small way, we've, the group of us who are reading the Superman book we've ignited a small thing, and I'm like, oh, this is what it was like. And it started to, like, you know, remind me and make me think about, like, you know, why this is fun and why other people thought it was fun too.
Well, I gotta say, I never had anybody to talk to about comics. There was one other guy in my high school who liked comics, and he was into Marvel and I was into DC. And
every night after school, it was behind the bleachers.
I've got to say, I do agree, though. When you were talking about that earlier, it sparked a memory from high school, and this kind of takes it off topic, but I think it's slightly related because it's still pop culture. So I grew up during the Attitude Era in wrestling. You know, you had Sting and the NWO, and then you had WWF, you know, on USA, Stone Cold Steve Austin and such. And we would come, you know, to school after watching wrestling, and that's like all we talked about. Fast forward like 30 years, and they said they were going to bring Stone Cold back for WrestleMania. And I was like, oh, I really want to watch that. You know, I haven't watched wrestling in a long time. Lo and behold, I watch it. It was pretty entertaining, but, you know, you're just sitting there by yourself watching it because none of my other family wants to watch it. And I'm like, yeah, I'm probably not ever watching this again. So I do think that like camaraderie and just, you know, having fun discussing the stuff adds a lot to it.
Yeah.
When I was 13, we did that. Exactly what you kids was talking about not doing. We actually in middle school would bring our comics with us, and this is the Frank Miller, Chris Claremont Wolverine days, that like the peak of Marvel really. And we would just hang out. We'd pass around these books and we would read them. We would talk about them, ensuring that we're not getting a girlfriend or laid for, decades. But the thing is, you have a lot of people who have this thing in common. I love, by the way, any modern day female telling me that we kept girls out. No, we were more than welcoming, but no,
maybe too welcoming. Maybe that.
Yeah, I know, right? One of the things, though,
you're like Spider-Man.
Yeah. So wait, talking to you about Star Wars doesn't appeal to you? That's not sexy? Okay. But I do believe still that the movies could be such a good advertisement if they would advertise the comics. There is a section, all of us I'm sure have sat through it. Hi, this is so-and-so and so-and-so before even the previews start, and they have commercial after commercial. Well, if you're going to do a goddamn big-ass storyline every year, why are you not putting that in the theaters right before your damn movie? Mm-hmm. There was the Flash War. Why was that not advertised with the Flash movie? Not that anybody would have seen that.
Back in I think the last time that I remember that being a thing was around 2015, because I remember
New Age of Heroes.
There was at least radio ads for Flashpoint.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember,
that would have been late 90s. That's 211, 210.
Was it? No. Yeah. So maybe I'm thinking of another one. But like there was because I remember around 2015 there being some ads.
It was the New Age of Heroes.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah, right. Remember with Slider and
I thought that was like 17. I thought.
Well, maybe I'm wrong too.
Anyway, it doesn't matter. Yeah,
but anyways,
New 52 was anyway. It doesn't matter.
But there was I guess it must have been something else. Anyways, but because I remember radio ads as late as that advertising a comic. Mm-hmm. And then and there I think it was Iron Man 2. If you got the Blu-ray, there might have been an ad for a comic, maybe. I'm trying to remember. But like as the MCU continued to barrel on, there was a certain threshold or line they crossed, and they didn't even bother. And it was just like we're using these IPs as loss leaders to just to just market films and products, and we don't really care that much about marketing the comic side of it, because they have massive marketing wings. It's not like they don't know how, they choose not to. It's clearly a choice. So,
Warner Brothers is
listen to AM radio, and sometimes you'll hear Marvel Comics ads on like CBS Sports Radio. It's like,
really?
Who do you think's listening to this?
do they still do those? Is that contemporary?
What's that?
Are they still doing those? Is that recent?
It's like every so often, like once a year or something, like randomly.
Okay.
That's so weird. And it's especially weird because it's like, okay, the people that are listening to AM sports radio are like old fogies like us, right?
Yeah, exactly.
They're not making, by and large, making comics that we want to buy. That's why I make my own.
The big corporations don't care about saving overall. They like the IPs. They don't really care about saving comics as an industry. And
they're making just enough money to keep the lights on.
Right, but they don't really care about it. Otherwise, yes, we could think of 10, 20 ways to try to tie these in to, say, promote Free Comic Book Day. Say, hey, if you like this, just put up a little QR code that people can scan, and it helps them find their nearest comic shop, or any number of 100 things. But they don't care about it. They just want to.
Actually, even worse than that, they mock them. Isn't most of the time in the films themselves, when comics get mentioned, it's usually to roll their eyes and go, "Oh my gosh, comics!"
This ain't a comic book, Steve.
Right? Yeah, they'll do that. They will actively mock the tradition that led to them being on film or television.
Or the superhero name. They make fun of the fact that people have superhero names. Like,
it used to be
Star-Lord, Star-Lord.
Yeah, didn't they do that?
Calls him Star-Lord,
Didn't they do that in Logan? Wasn't it like
in Logan? Well,
They
in
do that in
Logan, it was
everything.
a sort of a plot point because it was like, oh, the real life isn't like the comic books because like there's an alternate history and that kind of thing. But
the guy who's about to be wearing yellow spandex in the first X-Men movie made a joke. What would you prefer, yellow spandex? Yeah, at the beginning, it used to not embrace the movie, but yeah,
that's
you're right.
what I always wanted.
Yeah, I remember being pissed. I remember being pissed because Dolph Lundgren wasn't wearing the skull.
Right.
Yeah, he just had it on his knife. In fact, but now I look back and I go, you know what? I would rather have movies like that than freaking Captain Marvel any day. You know, because at least they got the spirit of the character right.
Yeah, and I always wondered why they didn't do the skull on the shirt. I mean, that would have
too cartoony. It was too much like a comic book.
Yeah,
too much like a comic book destroyed a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Warner Brothers, by the way, has always shot themselves in the theatrical foot when it came to their characters. They've got the most famous superheroes of all time in their lot, and we got Batman on TV, and then we got a wonderful Superman movie. Nowadays, that wonderful Superman movie comes out. Okay, we need a whole universe for it. Then it was like, okay, let's put out another superhero and let's ignore Green Lantern. Let's ignore the Flash and all of the others. Granted, on TV, that was a different story because they would have the Super Friends and so forth. There was always something on TV for DC.
There was a Flash live-action TV show as well.
Loved it. Hated the pilot. Loved the rest of it. The pilot was so boring.
I can see that. Yep. The pilot was
dull.
I enjoyed it, but I had definite like 13-year-old glasses on for that one. So.
I was 21 at the time, and I'm a nerd at that point. I don't even know why my wife agreed to go out with me because the first time she came to my house and saw my room, I had a wall of comics. Like literally, I hung up from the most valuable all the way down to the least valuable because I was bored one night, and all the way across. I was like nerd freaking city, and yet so.
Well, I think all of us that get married marry up. I think
yes, that absolutely happened on this one.
Oh
my gosh, you took a bath. Look at that. Look at you. Where did you take a bath at? Huh? You can see he's all wet on one. He only took a bath on one side, though. There you go.
That was the dirty side.
Can I mention something? I've been wanting to point this out when we were talking
Twiddless,
about
Twiddles.
Yeah.
Back in '89, I talked about comic book adaptations, how they did that for all the movies up until the '80s, and part of it is because comic adaptations served a point because the movies would leave the theaters and you'd never see them again, and then VHS came out and changed that completely.
Right.
But but there was still some point to adaptations because you have one comic that is exactly like what the movie is, except in the case of Superman 4, where the comic was way better. It actually made that movie work. But the
type of stuff that would have got me to read the comic.
Yeah, so every now and then it would get you. It would prompt people to see the movie. The movie would prompt people to see the comic. But another thing I remember from '89 is Robert Greenberger edited together these paperback books, really thick volumes. And the first one was all like 17 Joker stories, and it came out in '89. And
the greatest Joker stories ever told.
No, it wasn't. This was paperback. This is like all new stories that he just got a whole bunch of authors to just do little stories. Some of them I still remember. Some of them are creepy, and one of them is just hilarious, where Bruce Wayne has to infiltrate. The Joker has taken a whole bunch of stand-up comedians hostage, claiming he's the best one, and he forces them to tell jokes. And Bruce Wayne actually goes undercover and has to tell a joke, and just to make the Joker laugh. And it's just I'm underselling it. It's an awesome book. And he did the same thing when the sequel movie came out. He came out with Catwoman and Penguin stories, and there was all kinds of tie-ins. Even though Denny O'Neil, he actually saw the plot for the first movie. He said, "There's no movie there." he never liked any of he would see the stories that they came up with for the movies, and he's like, these are awful, but they'd still do an attempt to tie in with them and promote things. And even in the
the Mr. Freeze year, Batman and Robin year, they came out with standalones of Mr. Freeze and Bane and Poison Ivy. You remember this? It all tied in.
Oh yeah.
So it's like there's something
in my file cabinets next door.
So there's something on the stands that is exactly what a kid might come in and go, I want to read more about Bane, and grab a Bane book. And it's like that's all you need to do is have something on the stands that even somewhat resembles. You were talking about that Marvel thing of there's nobody who's they aren't even the same people under the mask for all their main characters.
Well, even when the first X-Men movie came out, they had like 3 prequel comics that like were set in the universe of the movies and told the backstories of Rogue and Logan and I think it was Magneto. Yeah. Where you could, you go to the comic shop, you could pick these up and and the month before the movie came out and get yourself up to speed on what the lore was going to be.
Well, part of, I think, of course, what we're talking about and have kind of gone all over the place, but that's live streaming. Is just how do you get people interested in doing that? One of the things that has been brought up a couple of times, the price point is just out freaking outrageous, especially when you compare it to other forms of entertainment. I mean, for $9.99, if you have an Xbox, you can get their Game Pass, and you've got access to a ton of video games. It's You're talking nowadays. It's $5 is cheap.
Yeah,
$5
is a cheap comic.
I quit smoking cigarettes because they got the $5.
And that's a big addiction.
You get 20 cigarettes.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah. Point being, it's people quit more addicting things for the same price.
How long does a cigarette take compared to reading a comic, Twitless?
Oh, if you're to smoke all the cigarettes?
If you're smoking a cigarette and reading a comic, which lasts longer?
Well, a modern comic, the cigarette lasts longer.
Is Alan Moore creating the cigarette?
Yeah. Now, one of the problems I've pointed out with new books, and I think actually Richard did a video on this as well, is the fact that nowadays they're, once again, written for the trade. Somebody jumps out of the window and it says, "Oh my God, I shouldn't have done this." And it's an entire page of a guy jumping out of a window. In the past, that would have been one panel, and then you would get so much more story to the rest.
Yeah, that would have been like a vertical panel that takes up like the entire page or whatever, but you would have had like more.
And you turn the page and it's a splash page of him landing, saying, "Dude, like, oh my God, I shouldn't land it, dude." And so it's wasted space. These 6-issue stories that could be condensed into one 1980s issue anymore.
Well,
last time I was here,
I was gonna say, look at Bendis's Spider-Man for the Ultimates universe, right? Like the first year and a half was just his by rote retelling of the first 2 Spider-Man stories.
Yep.
Yeah. You remember last time I was here, we recapped the Brave and the Bold 187 with the Metal Men, where they brought back all the Metal Men's enemies and had confrontations and each
marriage
and a marriage, and then the person getting married died, and it was 17 issues out of the 22 issues because there was a backup story.
Yeah, 17 pages. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to push back a little bit because
that was too much.
well, I'm going to push back a little because I see that point being made, and I think it's a valid point, but I also do want to say that there are stories where sometimes decompressing a story from a perspective of the art form I like. So I don't know if I want to say that shouldn't ever be done.
Right.
I do think it's something to consider, and to Englantine's point, I think that there are times where the decompression of a story can detract from it. And so to me, I think I would weigh that story more on, is this Because like the first issue of Spawn, like the first few issues of Spawn are extremely decompressed. Image Comics started to decompress things a bit. Like almost the plot really starts to slow to a crawl in some places, but I've had people respond very positively to some of those first issues of Spawn just because of artistically how it's moving, how it's different, what he's doing with the panels, and how the story is kind of soaking in an emotional tone, I guess. So, but then there, I think, but I've seen stories, and maybe this will speak more to again what Eglantine is what you're putting down there. When the story is decompressing to show people just talking and eating at like a restaurant for no good reason, and it's not adding anything, and it just feels like it's a low quality television show that you just put on paper.
It's a slice of life book, but not even a good one.
Girl comic is what you're saying.
Right? Yeah, that's where I think that's where I get upset, and that's where I feel like it is a waste of space and it is a waste of time.
Yeah,
so
the Tarantinoing of things, you know, when Tarantino first showed up, everybody was singing the praises because he had people actually having conversations, not necessarily about the plot, and it made it seem more real. But then it was, let's just talk about random crap and ignore the fact that there's a 50-foot monster going on. Oh, let's show up. Okay, one punch. Now let's go talking about crap that has nothing to do with that 50-foot monster.
And one of the things Tarantino did is he used these conversations that weren't part of the story to move the story, because it was was giving a view. And I mean, you know, like a lot of good crime comics use those same type of devices. You know, it's you know, the detective walks into a bar and he's interrogating the bartender, you know, but it's not on the nose because of how it does, right? There's ways of using conversation that way.
And it was always something interesting, like, you know, Mr. whatever color he was not leaving a tip.
Yeah, he was Mr.
Pink.
Brown.
Mr. Pink.
Oh, Pink. Yeah.
It was Mr.
Oh,
Pink.
yeah, Mr. Brown. It sounds like shit. Yeah, it's better than Mr. Pink. Okay, yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Can I mention one thing that I think is interesting about this whole conversation regarding the industry?
No.
And it's okay. All right, well, moving on. He said no.
Let's hear it, sir.
One thing that I think doesn't get talked enough about, we all know it on some level, but I think we don't bring it up and talk about the implications of it, is I can't think of an example of that is analogous to comics in that. Is there any other industry where the entirety of the mainstream of it it's owned by a different industry? So it's like, hey, we have the cake industry and we love cake, but like all cake is owned by Ford Automotive and then Chrysler. You'd be like, what's going on with the cake? But it's like completely owned by someone completely different. Well, comics is that. Comics is an industry where the bulk of it is owned by completely somebody else. So,
well, I mean, you actually could apply that to the food industry to some degree, because we could talk more about distribution and medium. There are a lot of things you get at the grocery store that are owned by the same parent companies that own like fast food restaurants and stuff.
Sure, but that's still food. You
and
know,
chemical products. I mean, like Dow Chemicals owns a bunch of I think they own Tyson.
But you see where I'm going with this is, right? Like video gaming is you know, it really is its own industry. It has to survive based on its own video gameness. My cake broke down. But yeah, you see where I'm going with that? It's like comics are a industry that have been completely broken down and folded into something else.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And
for a while DC Comics was owned by a telecom giant.
Yes.
And I don't think we can understate how important the implications and the consequences of that are.
Yeah,
But
I think that
go
I think that actually brings in the whole idea of this of the problem with the point of entry, right? Because the people up the chain, you know, they're Dow Chemical does in fact own cake.
All right.
Yeah.
Everyone's
You should also
poking
look at how much stuff Yamaha owns.
Everyone's poking holes in my theory.
There is a separation between the people that are the owners and the people that and that are the producers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that definitely plays a factor in this whole idea where when it was just distributed through the news distribution, that indirect news agency distribution, there were more points of failure in the system, but everybody had a motivation to make sure that those books got to the customers, because if they didn't, nobody got paid. But that's not the case anymore, because the direct market, the company, DC, Marvel, a few others, they get paid regardless, because the comic shops are going to be there to, or at least some of them are going to be there to buy the books.
Some of them are just selling the old ones and are basically like secondhand stores now.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, the AOL Time Warner reminds me. We used to have these wonderful Warner Brothers stores in the late 90s, and in the early 2000s, they disappeared. The Warner Brothers store in Japan had like 3 stories and a glass elevator with Superman lifting the elevator. And it could be seen from outside with him lifting the elevator up.
That is awesome.
Yeah, and at the Mall of America, we had just statues of Daffy and Bugs Bunny outside directing people in. It was a beautiful store. I bought so many cool things there, including beanies of Green Lantern. Wait, who ever heard of a beanie of Green Lantern? But there he is. I've got one of Martian Manhunter and Marvin the Martian.
When you said beanie, I thought you meant like I was so wanting to see you wear a beanie with Green Lantern, like the power lamp you just spin on top.
But the whole reason, according to Chuck Dixon, the whole reason they all of a sudden vanished, despite being, as far as I could tell, packed every time I went there, is that AOL does not like brick and mortar stores. They wanted everything online, so they just shut down all these wonderful stores.
Things aren't done with that kind of flair anymore. I mean, even Disney is stopping the Disney magic at the parks. I'm a Floridian born and bred. I've been to Disney, except for the last couple of years, every year, 3, 4, 5 times at least. And they've stopped the guest service that they used to have. Now it seems like
wouldn't that be because of a certain governor with certain tax things?
There's more to it. Actually, the pandemic made it seem like it's okay for them to be mean to people, and they just lost the guest service aspect. So now you should feel lucky to go to Disney rather than they should feel lucky to have our business. Bob Iger is f***ed up, and Bob Chapek, he really screwed up by doing exactly what you're talking about, Captain. He listened to his blue hair employees and jumped into politics, and DeSantis is like, slap. DeSantis is awesome, by the way.
And the side note that on totally, then we got to change the subject. Otherwise, we'll go the whole different train.
Oh, that's live. That's live streaming, dude.
I did want to quickly say
is now about Ron DeSantis.
You can actually still get that at some places, right? Usually the smaller competitors. So with DC, since they are owned by Warner and stuff, if I go to Six Flags, they always have DC heroes walking around. They have a Hall of Justice at Six Flags. They have all the merchandise. Talk about like your plushy Beanie Babies and stuff. You can get all of that at Six Flags over Texas.
Oh, did you guys see that video of Carowinds and the roller coaster that just had like a pylon that was just like detached?
No.
There was like you can watch a video of it. It's recent. They had to shut down this ride because someone just had caught it on video. And as the roller coaster goes over, there's a little bounce because one of the pillars is just detached from the ride, and it was so terrifying. And it was just like, oh gosh, I'm never going on a roller coaster again.
Okay, so there is this thing. It's called ESG, BlackRock, by the way. Yeah. They actually have been. There's a company that works with them that advises. Steven Crowder actually talked about this recently.
McKinsey and Company.
Yeah, this is they actually exposed something I was very surprised to see. because I did notice even when I was working at the theme parks that this has happened. There has been, especially at Disney, less focus on safety. By that I mean every day, when you work at a theme park, every day you walk the ride. If it's a dark ride, you walk the track, make sure it's clean, make sure that all the animatronics are working properly. Sometimes you might ride the ride, but a lot of times you'll walk it with the lights on because you get a better look. And with roller coasters, every morning, I worked at Universal Studios. Every morning you would see the maintenance men walking the track and looking at anytime there were stairs, anytime there were steps. A lot of those are so if the ride does stop, we can get guests off, and they would be looking at every bolt, and this group convinced Disney you don't have to do that every day. That's your rides are fine. You don't have to do that every day. And it's true. The rides are fine because they do that every day. Right. But since this group has been doing this, more Jungle Cruise boats have sunk. There have been Song of the South. Now they closed it down. But Splash Mountain boats have sunk. Rides are going down 2 or 3 at a time. Lucky bastards. I have been here my entire life. I've never been in a Jungle Cruise boat that's sunk. I want to do that. Please let that happen while I'm on the ride. Thank you. I've ridden the ride many times and it worked. I want the one where it sinks. I can swim. Okay.
Knowing is half the battle. That's amazing. Well, anyway, where was it? That's a great story, and I totally lost what we're talking about.
That's live streaming, dude. All right, so
I had it in my head until the bolts.
Hey, you invited me. You invited me. That's all.
It's a great show.
You've seen my live streams. We talk 5 seconds on the topic that's on the title.
One of the things that is. Heck, I don't know. I don't have a summation. I was about to rehash the entire show, but that seems stupid. Because
I really appreciate that perspective on the theme park industry. That was a really nice tangent.
No, yeah. Well, and one of the things that's so frustrating is that, like, even with the topic, you're looking at the shift in focus from the through line to the customers to the through line to the comic shops to the direct market is. While the direct market has a lot of benefits for consumers, there's just that disconnect that I don't think can be undone. Plus, comics aren't being made the same way. I mean, web comics, digital comics, things like the Shonen Jump app have changed the way the people who are into books experience books. And Marvel and DC and other American companies have been so hesitant to meet the new market. At this point, I don't think that they can ever be at the top of the game again. In terms of distribution, or nor do they seem to want to.
Well, and I think also there is like an entire different market outside of the direct market.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's people finding ways to sell their books, through their own distribution methods.
Right.
Yeah, that's been a say what you will about the new Comicsgate. Say what you will about Tim and Mark over at Iconic Comics with Doug Ernst and such.
Or just even the book market too. Like there's comics books in the book market being sold at Barnes and Noble.
Well, I mean,
you don't need the big two.
I get tons of manga just at the Walmart, and it's like $3 off the cover price. So you think I'm not going to buy them at Walmart? You're kidding.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things too. There are other, and manga is a great example of entry points because they're at the Walmarts. They tied in with the product that people can watch on the Crunchyroll or whatever they're doing if they're into the animes or whatever. And so you already have that in there. They've been able, I think, to capture an audience in a way that Marvel and DC left behind. Progressively from 83 up until 2012.
Well, if you
shaving off bits of their market.
If you don't mind, I tie the theme park thing. One of the messages there was, of course, that they've allowed people to be angry to guests, which was when I worked there a freaking no. You do not do that. Guest service above all. This, you have people proudly announcing that the book I am writing and drawing is not for you, sir. It is not for anyone who disagrees with what I think of. It's not for anyone who doesn't like the direction I'm bringing the character. Somebody, I think it was Jim Turner, could be somebody else, brought up the letters page in comics. And that was started by Stanley and Flo. So help me out, Captain. Flo Steinberg? Steinberg, thank you. Okay, so it was brought up by that. Actually, a lot of the letters you would see in the earliest issues of Marvel Comics were written by Stan Lee and Flo. But the thing is they started listening. They started, okay, well, you don't like that? Let's see how we could steer back into that direction. They wanted to make sure that they were making comic books that the readers actually wanted. And nowadays, you don't get that. Nowadays, if you don't like Krakoa X-Men, you're a bad faith reader. You're not actually a fan. Hell, there's actually now a group of fans who call themselves actually fans and would call somebody who would call out bad writing anti-fans. You're just not the right kind of reader.
It sounds like very 1984.
He's such a galaxy brain. Oh gosh.
Oh my, the guy's an idiot. I love going into his videos and just what do they call him? E-fapping. I thought fapping meant something different on the internet. I really
that's the joke. It's because it stands for every frame of pause, because you're pausing the video every like couple of seconds, but then it's the other.
I am not doing the old thing to the new thing. It's just not happening, guys.
Be very clear. To be perfectly
a lot of times it is kind of a circle jerk. So
that's part of it. That's part of it too.
Yeah.
There is a certain thing that makes you go clicks. Yay! All right, let me. Yeah.
Marvel just killed, or I don't know if they killed him off, but they ended the Punisher because they didn't like the audience that liked the Punisher. And so they actually like brought back his wife as alive, and she tells him off and tells him how.
Wife?
Yeah, they brought her back and said she was always alive, and she told him what a loser he was and how she hated him. And I've only seen excerpts of this, but Chuck Dixon talked about it last night on his latest Ask Chuck Dixon, and he talked about how they here's Marvel, they can sell more of those Punisher symbols, and they can sell shirts with the Punisher symbol and hats with the Punisher symbol, and they don't want to because they don't like the audience. And I think his latest episode actually was called something.
I think they probably make more money on the Punisher symbol than they would the comics, if you want me to be honest.
Probably, yeah.
And the crazy thing about the crazy thing to me about that whole deal, especially because one of the things I heard about the Punisher thing is that she announced that Mrs. Castle announced she wanted to divorce Frank, but she's been gone so long she's legally dead, so she can't divorce
basically
anyone.
Like Aunt May, right?
Aunt May. Don't get me started on Aunt May right now. I can't. Aunt May not being dead is a sore spot for me, and I don't care what you think about that.
Issue 400 was such a great issue to send Aunt May off on, except for the one thing where she goes, "I always knew you were Spider-Man," and just like, then why were you marrying Doc Ock? You always knew.
Always.
What was that all about?
Always right after that. That was the.
That doesn't work.
That's funny. I mean, it's not like Stan has ever made a continuity error.
That's true. But that was a great way to send her off, though, and they brought her back. But the Punisher thing, we went over that. We did an EFAP on that issue, and it was some of the most fun because it was such a betrayal of the character by the company that owned them, all because some cops had the Punisher symbol on there.
Kyle.
Say again.
And Chris Kyle. Some people really don't dislike Chris Kyle.
There you go. The thing is the Punisher was born out of a New York City that was absolutely crime-ridden. This is when you had the death wishes and all that kind of stuff coming up. And the Punisher fit right in on that. It was basically Republican justice, right? Dirty. It was needed. Right now, the Punisher, that kind of style is freaking needed because it's lawless over there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
don't
because
prosecute
I
you
don't
for
think a lot of
stealing
people
under
realize like the
$1,000.
70s New
This,
York.
this is where we fly the banner of Mike Barron's "Read the Private American."
There you go. Yeah, there you are. What were you saying, Captain?
I don't think a lot of like people my age or whatever and younger like realize how bad like New York City was in the 70s.
Yeah.
Now they do.
Well, yeah. Well, and I only know about it from like reading accounts, right? Like so wanting to get into writing crime, I studied a couple of not seriously in depth, but reading a little bit about like the Son of Sam killings and the environment that happened in there. And Andrew Klavan in his memoir, A Great Good Thing, talks about living in New York during all of that time. And so I'd kind of like gotten keyed in on that. And then around that time, I in my life, I decided to watch the Dirty Harry pictures. And it's like, oh my goodness, this is what everyone's talking about from that, from art being made at the time that people are reflecting on it. And so that's sort of something that was notable. But
yeah, if you watch
Taxi
movies
Driver,
like
there you
Night
go.
of the Juggler and Taxi Driver and all those about what the Times Square was like back then, you know, everybody was standing out front, naked. And, you know, it's just everywhere. Even in the mid 90s, the critic would joke about Times Square being like that. And by 2000, they were complaining about how it's just Disney and corporate, and this used to be fun. And now it's just nothing but companies working here. And it's like, but it's so much safer and not as nasty, and apparently it smells less like pee than it used to.
Yeah,
So,
what do they call that when businesses go in and they?
Yeah,
It
and then,
was
but then they raise property
gentrification.
values.
Yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
okay, first of all, you're putting nostalgia glasses on for the big giant rats in the alley. Okay, it just
well, those are the politicians. They're still there.
That was Mickey Mouse.
Thank you. Yes, maybe that's why I'm so warped. I've got a 6-foot mouse living right down the street. You're right. But that's what happened. I'm sorry, you going ahead.
I was just going to say that the critic actually had a thing where the main character is dancing around having this beautiful New York City moment, and then he wakes up and the guy next to him is going, nudes. They're ugly and they smell like garbage, but they're nude. You got to give me that. It's like,
wow.
Sorry.
I forgive you.
You broke it.
I do a good Maurice LaMarche. What can I say?
Gosh.
Okay.
What were we talking about?
News.
Somehow we were talking about the Punisher, and that got us off on all this. Sorry.
Yeah.
I was just talking about the Punisher and how it talks to how people don't care if they lose half the audience, and and that's just. And I don't want to be partisan. I'm just saying there's, you hear this all the time that it's not even about, a party or anything, but just, if you don't like what I'm doing, then I don't care. Whereas that was an attitude that Stan Lee would never have.
Right.
Well, the thing is like the Punisher is like a low selling book, but a dedicated audience.
Yeah.
So when you kick that audience back, you're probably never getting that audience back.
Yeah, but he's had 3 movies in a series, and something else is coming, I thought, but maybe not.
For all of their talk about guys taking over and guys doing this and men suck, and so we need to bring in more women to write comics and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
The best of the Punisher movies was directed by a woman. The Punisher Warzone was directed by a woman. And yes, I do count that. Thomas Jane, I know people love him as the Punisher, but Punisher Warzone is probably the closest to Punisher that we ever got on on a big screen.
Yeah.
And look, a lot of the modern creators, they see things as, okay, well, it can't be what you guys want. It has to be how I want it. And so they put themselves in this whole thing. You get with acting too. If you are not a paraplegic, you can't play a paraplegic. If you're writing a comic book, it has to be about a character that is you, and it's just all self-insert. So instead of self-inserting themselves into the Punisher, they self-inserted themselves into the Punisher's wife. And she got to say all the things that writer wanted to say to the Punisher. And look, there's a way to do it. A little bit back, they had Nora Freeze unfreeze. And now, ever since that Batman animated episode, we got a noble Nora Freeze who was diseased, and she was put into this frozen, and she was put into a cryogenic chamber, and Victor Freeze was a noble villain who, while he did evil for a good reason. When she unfroze, she had the same problem Victor Freeze had, and she was like, yeah, let's go do evil. And it was a great freaking turn. It was what they were trying to do with the Punisher, but they did it right. We had no idea who Nora Freeze really was. We imprinted on that.
Right.
Through Victor Freeze. But Victor Freeze is somebody who's willing to kill in order to save his wife. So who really is Nora Freeze? They answered that question. I thought that way worked. But it worked in a way that established Victor Freeze, that helped Victor Freeze. The way they did with the Punisher, it was all about getting rid of him. It was all about making him look bad. It was all about demuting. What I don't know. Making him smaller,
telling him off. It's all about telling him off in their
and
own
eventually
words.
Killing him.
Yeah. Have you ever seen that movie 3 Billboards Outside of
Yes.
Ebbing or whatever it's called? I think it's a good movie, but there's one moment where a priest shows up just to comfort the woman who's, I forget what happened in that movie. It's been so long, but the priest shows up just to say something nice and say, are you okay? And the woman starts telling him how she thinks that the legal system for prosecuting gangs should have been used against the Catholic Church. And she just goes on. And it's like, it's so weird. It's like the writer just took this moment to have a theory he's always wanted to have voiced be said by her. And it's like, I can understand she doesn't get along with the Catholic Church, but it's like this weird detour. You can just see it.
Just telling one priest
I'm just
that probably
taking
has nothing to do with anything.
Yeah, this is just me, my soapbox for a second. And it's like, it's so weird. And so I can't say it's out of character because you barely know the character, but you know what I mean? It's like, it's the very obvious self-insert. Almost the most obvious until that Starfire book came out with the Starfire's daughter looks exactly like the author of the book.
Best comic in the last 10 years.
Starfire. That was like a couple years ago. Yeah.
And that's actually, you bring that up, it brings me, that was one of my least favorite moments of Civil War. Not the comic, the movie, Captain America Civil War. Where the one lady grouses at Tony Stark, and then Tony decides that, oh, hey, maybe I've always been the villain. And just
there you go.
The best thing about the comic was the comic wasn't very good, but the ending was pretty good because they at least did something at the end. The movie, it's like it had nothing to do with the comic.
I absolutely agree with you, Cummings. The movie was better in my opinion
overall,
but the comic book, Captain America should be smart enough to know that he can't change a law by punching Tony Stark.
Yes. And this is the thing. This is the thing about that gets me so angry about that story. And we did a whole roast on Civil War about a year ago. I'm not going to get into all of it. The thing that gets me the most angry about it is Captain America.
Already.
It hasn't been. There's no way it was a year.
Okay, whatever. It doesn't matter. Moving on. And you've okay.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. I'm trying to do math and talk, and I can't. Anyway, point being, Captain America is in this punch out with Tony Stark, right? And then he looks around and he sees all this destruction, and then he's like, "I was wrong. I'm so sorry." If Captain America decided that he needs to punch Tony Stark in the face, there's no way that Steve Rogers hasn't already weighed all the consequences and decided that this is where he needs to go. There's just no way. Like suddenly he's like, wait, was this a bad choice?
The way I see it, the real problem with Civil War is the fact that a bunch of people went through 9/11 and then felt that they needed to put superheroes through the trauma they went through, or at least felt that they went through. And so it was like, real people went through 9/11. New York went through 9/11. We need to now basically make our heroes suffer in order for us to feel a connection to them.
No, I think you're right.
I don't
behind the curtain, but I'm just talking about on this side of the curtain.
No, that's the thing is like, I don't like that they did that, but it's like, can you find another form of therapy, please? You have to traumatize everyone else now.
I have no idea what you're talking about, but obviously I'm not a Marvel reader, so I didn't know about the 9/11 thing. But all I knew was that Peter Parker took his mask off, and his boss passed out. Right? That was like, that's all I knew, and I don't know what happened to that. Did the whole world forget that he was Peter Parker? Or
he sold his soul to the devil to make everybody forget.
Yeah,
I knew that.
The only thing worse than worse than Civil War was the consequence of Civil War being one more day.
I'll say this too. I've said so many times on my own channel, I'm going to spread the message. We have not seen Captain America since he got shot in the head. I don't know the character, and this goes to something 7-1 is saying. On the flip side, there's a mob of rabid fanfare and wannabe writers who insist that artistic expression is a democratic effort. If you write to please, then you don't have much of a voice. I disagree wholeheartedly like this. I'm going to point to John Byrne. Point being is, as I said, we haven't seen Captain America because they lost the core of the character. John Byrne wrote Superman in the 1980s. Brand new character considering what came before Crisis. Absolutely brand new character, but it was still Superman. He followed the core of the character. He followed the core of the supporting characters. In some cases, he redid and reconfigured some of them. But they never lost the feeling that it was a Superman comic book. With Captain America, he got into the hands of a lot of writers who just don't feel great about being in America. The last being Ta-Nehisi Coates, who seemed to write the book for freaking ever. And it just, we lost the core of Steve Rogers. It's gone. And in their effort to put Sam Wilson in there, you lose Sam Wilson because he's, instead of being the Falcon, by the way, he was never a partner or never a sidekick. He was a partner. He's his own character. So instead of being a great Falcon, he's a watered down Captain America who now has a chip on his shoulder. Unfortunately,
and a horrible costume.
I don't like the costume.
It's bad.
It's interesting you bring that up because there's an article I read. Sorry, did you want to?
No, go on ahead.
But I read an article. This actually again speaks to your point here, which is it was an academic article that pointed out that Captain America seems to have lost something, and it had something to do with the fact that we've never had a complete American consensus. That's a myth. But there is at least an idea, a believable myth. You could at least market the idea of an American consensus to people in pop culture and have people kind of more or less nod along with it. And Captain America essentially represented that. Mm-hmm. And after he got shot in the head, it was basically kind of that moment. It was like, oh, we no longer have this, and I don't know if we ever will. And so because Captain America... Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think there are actually, not to totally argue with you, Englentine, I think there are individual issues that capture that. But as far as full runs, I would have to agree. I mean,
there's an exception to every rule.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty sure something came out where some writer, maybe it wasn't in Ta-Nehisi Coates' run, but something on the side that was actually Captain America.
Like the series before that, when Mark Waid was writing, like the first 3 issues were really good, and then he had to put all his TDS into it.
I blame Captain Cummings. Seriously, Captain Cummings. Look, he actually was one of the writers who responded to OGCG.
Yeah, he came in. He didn't come on to a live stream with me, but we video conference for a few minutes, and then he pretended like he couldn't hear me, and then left.
Yeah. Okay. So I am very proud of my run in OGCG. I bring it up a lot. One of the things I always pointed out was that there were levels of aggression. And on the lower end, you had Doug Ernst, and then you had me. And then the boss of the bunch, not that he was actually a boss, but the big guy was, of course, Richard Meyer, Diversity in Comics Now, your boy Zach. And he was the one that everybody really seemed to be going after. And so you would have me and Doug, and we'd be giving our supposedly intellectual arguments and so forth and so on. And then you had Captain Cummings, who on the aggression was, okay, if we're here, was about yay. And he'd just jump into the fray going, die, motherfuckers, and then just lay it all out for everybody.
He was the super villain of the game.
It was freaking awesome.
It was on brand.
But Mark Waid saw this, and of course we all know what he did with Jawbreakers, and he actually put that kind of stuff into the book. And you would actually have other writers do that. Freaking Doug Ernst ended up being a villain in a Moon Knight comic. So Mark Waid went freaking nuts at a certain point with Captain America, and it went way farther off track than I am bringing this live stream right now. So I mean,
hasn't Waid always
You're probably
been
right.
little...
It probably was 100% me.
Yeah. But yeah, that was part of the thing. It was a very aggressive time.
I'll admit, I saw a video where somebody was showing something I said on Twitter like 6 years ago. It came across my algorithm on YouTube, and I clicked on it out of interest of what I said, and I was like, man, why was I commenting like this on Twitter? I didn't even know what the context was, but it was stupid.
Yeah.
Either give me my book or give me my $40.
I still never got that book
out. Oh gosh.
Well, and to something Twitless was saying, there's a long history of Mark Waid being a very aggressive,
didn't he
artist type?
A comic store called the police on him or something?
Yeah, I think he was a co-owner, if I recall the story correctly. But his other business partners, they needed intervention anyway. But that's not the point. But it hadn't really affected in the books. I mean, he did amazing stuff on Captain America and on the Flash during all of that time, right?
That shows really talent in writing. Then, if he's
he's doing World's Finest now. It's one of the best books on the show.
And I've heard really good things about it. But after not to go too far, but my opinion of Wade is somewhat soured. Even of some of his older works that I don't think quite hold up. Although, we can argue about that some other time.
Yeah. Well, how about we argue about Kingdom Come again?
No. Or maybe we could get back on the main topic.
I was like, please don't say it.
We've had 3 lengthy conversations about Kingdom Come on this show.
I was in one of those. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that one's still ongoing.
Well, why only have 3 conversations when you can have 4 conversations?
No, it'll come back on the anniversary again.
Probably because we're already at 2 hours, so bring it in.
Let's talk about distribution.
Yeah. No, I think we actually we've kind of covered everything that I wanted to talk about, even if it wasn't in an ABC order on all of that.
Then can I tell you something about Mark Waid before we go?
Oh,
I actually met him at probably the last convention I attended here, so it was before COVID. But I was at a table rubbing elbows almost, just one table away from him, and at a time when he didn't have anybody line too long or anything, I just came by and said, I wanted to ask you about 52 because I know you wrote the Elongated Man sections of 52, and the issue with his death. He said that was so rewritten. It's because Chuck Dixon's talked about this, how editorial now goes in and rewrites stories that have already been written and are ready to be published. And then editorial just drags things around because it didn't make any sense. Ralph had no plan and he's dead. It's what was his plan? He winds up dead. The whole point is that he traps these guys in the tower and then they have to bring him back to life in order to free them from the tower. And his condition is bring my wife back. That's my theory. And I was going to ask him about it. He said, I'll send you the script. And I'm like, Oh, awesome. He didn't think anything of it. He's like, just email me. I emailed him like 4 times. I'm like, I'd like to see that 52 script we were talking about. Nope, never came back. It's like, he's a busy guy, but man, I wish I could have seen that. So I know that politically he goes off on stuff, and if it's a political comic he's writing, that may be a problem for a lot of us, but I still think he's a great writer on a lot of books. So he's the one person who could bring me back to a book, like if he's writing
Archie 1941 is one of the greatest books of the last 10 years he wrote. I will stand by that statement. Archie 1941 is a freaking masterpiece.
I haven't read it. I will look for that.
Highly recommend it.
Thanks. Okay, that's from me.
Well, we do have a question in the chat that is Seven's got some interesting observations about ownership and expectation that are worth reading through. But to not take a whole different topic on the subject, Fizz writes, I plan to eventually use a magazine distributor for comics. Would that work? Sure. I mean, the overhead and expectations can be high. You've got to be able to distribute a certain amount before a magazine distributor will pick up on it. Yeah, I mean, magazine distribution networks, that's basically and magazine and book distributor who is getting the books into Walmarts and things. So I mean, it definitely can be done, but you've got to have
back in time.
What?
Too, because a lot of comics started with magazine distribution, so it's almost like re-rolling the clock back.
Yeah.
I think the main thing is don't get your hopes too high with that, though, because sometimes those, like Mitch Breitweiser tried a different distribution model, and I still think it could have worked, but however we can theory craft it, it didn't work the way he wanted.
He was trying to sell a chicken sandwich at a burger joint.
But what I'm saying is that regardless, it didn't work out for him, and so you just be prepared for some of those experiments to. If they work, that's great. If they don't work, collect the pieces and get ready for your next experiment.
It's a thing where you're going to have to be willing to lose $1 million at the chance of making, something like that. So
$500,000.
Yeah. Oh, that's so true, and it hurts.
Yeah, well, I mean, because that's the thing is like if you're starting up something new like that, it's a 5-year plan kind of a thing.
Yeah,
you can't expect unless it's a situation where you're finding a partner who's already got a foot in the door on something like that. And that's one of the things that's like I was going to show this earlier. One of the things so frustrating about DC in '89, when Batman was in the theater, they released a series of mass market trades that were available at gas stations and grocery stores.
I remember those.
That are just digest size, and these are all Golden Age stories. So they already only are. They'd have to pay a single thing except for the production on it. It's printed on the same newsprint as the dime store novels, right?
Yeah.
Cape Crusader classics. Got the first appearance of Joker and a bunch of there's like I think 12 different Joker stories from like 1941 up through like 56. DC could be doing stuff like this. I mean, they already own all of this art. In fact, some of the stuff is about to go into the public domain. So it's like there's no reason to not, renew copyright on some of that stuff. It'll be like 12 years, but they don't seem to have a lot of interest in making these archive products available for people. Which is really funny, especially because a couple of years ago, what's his name? DiDio was complaining that like their reprints were selling better than their new comics, and why do people just want to buy one issue of Teen Titans that's like reprinted? Well, it's because people like old books, man. And you can get the same story for $3 at the time instead of
well, like if you're
$30 on
an omnibus, there's like 30 issues for like $70 or something like that. I don't know.
If you're buying it on a discount.
Yeah. Well, a lot of it is they're leaving money on the table. And they're not making use of. And these big companies, like there was a big discussion in the chat earlier about.
Well, digests are a great idea. I got into a lot of stuff because of those little Blue Ribbon digests or Archie digests.
Oh yeah, I remember those.
And those were at checkout. Those were just like in the spinner rack or the magazine stand. Those would be impulse things when you're checking out.
And up until like a couple of years ago, didn't they?
Well, they still do. They still do the Archie, and for a little bit they tried with the Avengers. I know what you're talking about was the old DC where they would do like Legion of Superheroes or Metal Men or something like a more. Sometimes they were the more obscure stories. Sometimes they were like Superman and such like that. It was a great way to get kids into comics.
Yeah,
that's one of the reasons I lament the loss of Marvel Team Up and Marvel 2-in-1. They tried to revive it with Kamala Khan, but for like the first 5 issues, it was Spider-Man. Yeah. It's like, no, you
gotta have a different character every issue.
Yeah, they were trying to do for the trades. So like the first 5 issues was the same character, same story. The whole point about Marvel 2-in-1 and Team Up was every issue was a different character to team up with, a different story. It was some way to show kids, it definitely worked with me, that, hey, have you heard of the Shroud? No? Well, he's also over here. Go try a Shroud comic. You know, you get the character there.
Have you ever heard of Kazar?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. You get it, you know, and of course you would, okay, let me check more Kazar out. Let me check other stories out with them. And that was a real, in DC Presents, of course, on the DC side, they had DC Comics Presents and Brave and the Bold. It was a great way to introduce the entire universe through a more popular character.
I think the whole point of this distribution art discussion is, like we said, if the spinner rack just comes back and that's it, that's not going to solve anything. And and as much as I would love to see the digest and the checkout, that's only, all of these things are just part of it. And we do need like all these things and more, because the content has to be worthy of reading. And
the bad thing about it is do they even have like a magazine like market anymore? Even, I mean,
so if I go back to my earlier point about comics being owned by other industries, part of the problem with that is if I go back to my cake industry example, if the cake industry has to survive or die based on how it innovates and creates cake, then you'll see naturally the people who make good cake will go, oh, these are the ingredients we should use. These are the strategies we should employ, because we have to be in business making cake.
I mean, cake sells itself, though.
You're right. So what I'm saying is that
I want cake.
How would you put cake in a spinner rack? I don't get that.
You're doing this with a fat guy, and I've got fat guy urges,
what
and now I just want cake.
Comics should sell themselves, and they're not.
What I'm saying is that if we could get back to some comic book companies having to succeed or die based on comics, a lot of these problems would start solving themselves, because they'd go, oh, we should distribute better. Oh, we should market better. Like, it's just, I feel like part of this is it's indicative of where we're at as an entire industry. And if we just have, because like the heart of American capitalism, if you want to say it, is it's competition. It's being put to the test and then needing to prove yourself. If you have a safety net of any kind where it's just like, yeah, it's fine. It doesn't matter if you succeed or fail. You're still going to be in business. That industry will stagnate. Like that's what will happen. I think that's where we're at. I know. I was really trying to
bands.
Milk.
It's a great band. It's a great band.
The cake, by the way, is not real.
It's a lie.
Gosh. That's a show.
That's a show.
I agree with that. I agree with Ethereal Dragon. I want to see cake in a spinner rack.
Yeah.
Let them eat cake. Let them eat cake.
Okay. I don't know what the last thing I said before my computer went stupid again, but this has been the Mattriarchy. Does anybody have something they want to pitch or share before we call it a night for the reels?
I just want to say you can find my channel here on YouTube. I stream every night from 4 to 6 playing Zelda, and I do other things like movie reviews.
I've got an auction every Saturday night at 8 p.m. Eastern. Join it. It's basically a big old hangout where we talk about comics. I'm selling them, but we don't like. We'll say, okay, this is of course the 4th appearance of the Flash. This is not for. I've already sold it. But what we'll talk about is what's inside, what's on the pages. Yeah, of course, it's going to be $100 book because of the condition. But when we're selling the books, we're always talking about why they're good, not necessarily why they're going up in value or anything like that. The whole point is to fill out a collection, maybe get you to try something new. You talk about we need something to talk about comics. That's very much what we do. Granted, it veers off also. Any live stream that I'm in is going to be like, we'll spend 5 minutes on the topic and then.
I mean, we spent at least 10 this time.
So there you go. Yeah. I'm not a big fan of Yellow Flash. He spent a week chastising and insulting me and all that kind of stuff once. Some of the funniest stuff I've ever heard, though. One thing he did get right is that whenever I come on these shows, I tend to just talk way too much. So there you go.
Well, it's a talk show. That's what we do here.
You would think. Comics Division said, I like having you on the show sometimes. That means I don't have to talk for 45 minutes because you'll take over. Okay, there you go. Yeah.
That's beneficial for this show, and my computer kept fouling up for sure.
Hey, I think Twitless took over pretty much whenever you dropped. So,
well,
you know.
And I do appreciate that.
Applause to him.
Yes, absolutely. So also Twitless dropped his Indie Planet link where you can check out the Adventures of Omega Girl.
I have share my screen. I can show the people.
Let me get to it here. There we are.
There we go. Yeah, I have 3 issues. Self-published, self-made for the most part. I mean, like I don't draw it, but like I write, I edit, I letter, and selling it on Indie Planet. And modestly priced too. You can get digital versions or print on demand. So classic adventure superheroes. Like when Englentine was mentioning the core of Superman being the superpower is doing what's right, that's exactly what I'm channeling for Omega Girl. I call her second. Her other superpower is that she stubbornly will do what she thinks is the right thing. It's her stubbornness that's the real superpower there. So anyway, check that out.
I have
read. So you're married.
Yes, actually. How did you know?
And of course, we've got Exodymus Chaos, which is the Metals webcomic, and
you can find the print versions, some of which are on Indie Planet as well. I have 5 books on there. I'm still waiting for them to drop Realms and Relics. I don't know if I need to bug them or not. But you could get 5 chapters of the webcomic available. 3 are Exodymus Chaos. 1 is A Hymn of Valor, which is another superhero, Superman-like comic about a little boy who his biggest drawback is that he's 9-year-old. But aside from that, he's got a good heart. And you can even find the novelized version of Exodymus Chaos that has all the way up to 16 chapters on there, as well as Amazon. And if you don't want that, because you technically can read it all for free, I am also running commissions right now. So you tell me what you want, I will tell you what it costs. I dropped a link with some samples.
How much?
I tell you. You tell me what you want.
Okay, like an animated version of me with a bird on my shoulder and different kind of emotional things. I've been looking for that kind of stuff for a long time. Nobody would ever tell me how much.
Well, that's gonna depend on how long the animation is.
Oh,
how many frames I'm gonna have to do. Yeah, but
gotcha.
I'm probably cheaper than most people, to be honest.
Less expensive, sir.
Yeah.
Cheaper's another thing.
I like cheap.
Why would you not like cheap? You have a cheap on your shoulder.
There's a joke. I started talking about when my channel got shadow banned. I started talking about how I have to go back to work under the bridge, and so the whole thing about me being cheap under the bridge is kind of a thing. So.
More affordable, if you would prefer.
There you go. Yes.
True.
That's a better way to say it.
Just trollish a little.
I'm as affordable as a $5 hookup.
Wow. Okay.
Wow, you can make $5. You must be awesome.
Normally, this is the time of the show where I would send you to idealcomics.net, but we are having web problems, and you can't find us there. But you can find me on Twitter at MDReese, and you can find Ideal Comics on Global Comics to get a share of a somewhat free webcomics. Some of our comics on Global are free. Some of them are behind the paywall. And Fun Star Storyteller in the chat is working on a project for us. I froze again. This is the worst day ever.
You're not frozen?
You're not
No.
frozen.
Oh yeah, no, we got you.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I tried putting this. Okay, it's gonna die soon, so we're gonna call it.
I
We
put
gotta-
your link in the chat.
Eglantine wasn't moving.
Yeah.
Well, I
Okay,
normally
here we
don't.
go.
We all look frozen.
Yeah, no, it's fine. It's fine. But Star's working on a project that we'll be announcing soon. You guys are teasing me now. I know.
What's he saying? He's stuck on my end.
So anyway. Okay, there we go. We'll call it. Let's show. Thank you guys. Next week, we talked a lot about movies in this stream, but next week the panel is going to be sharing their favorite comic book movies and why, and we'll be having that on. And after the week after, I'm not sure. We're doing something, but I haven't figured it out. So until next time, get out there and read some comics wherever you get them. Have a good night.
I feel like the end of The Naked Gun.
It still says we're live.
Yeah, I
Are
don't
you
know.
trying
It
to
still says we're live there.
We'll just chat until it tells me it's actually gone.
Okay, go figure. This is a great.
Eventually,
ending,
it'll kill itself.
It has to, right?
If you want, I can go into the YouTube studio and manually.
I'm having
kill it.
trouble connecting, it says.
You want me to manually kill it?
Tonight.
It's still going. Hey,
Yeah,
do you
I
want
know,
to see?
I know.
Do you want to see the best summary of Man of Steel in 5 seconds? You ready?
Sure,
Okay.
go for it. Might as well.
There you go.
Why is it that YouTube only like? I actually put on. I cheat because I've got multiple YouTube channels, and I'll put on my channel to get extra views. I'll put play all. They'll play one video and then off to Red Letter Media. What the honest? Seriously. Every goddamn time,
The
and
stream will never end.
Metal, you
It
might
is,
need
No,
to-
no,
is. This
I'm
game
on
does
my
never
way.
end.
It's going to end very soon.
and the thing is, my wife is absolutely